I had to laugh at myself a little bit because I had forgotten a folder to put my notes in, and so I thought, oh, I've got my school stuff. And so I just grabbed a folder, not realizing that the folder I grabbed says, I'm going to be so awesome today that yesterday is going to get jealous. Oh, I thought, yeah, until I looked inside and saw math homework. And then I thought, oh, oh no. And then I also brought these little cards that I took notes on, also not realizing that I can direct air traffic with them. They're so bright. I apologize if these blind anybody. So, it's not about me. And at the same time, it's entirely about me. Are you confused yet? Me too. That makes 2 of us. Or 20 of us. Whose idea was it to give me a mic again? Nian's like, oh God, oh, no, never again, I'm not doing that again. I think that the majority of miracles are simply changes in perspective, which is why I thought the daily word was so beautiful, on perspective, on turning points. I've had quite a number of turning points and perspective shifts, especially over the past 4 years, and especially after coming here and becoming a part of the Unite family and the Unite community. I have learned a tremendous amount, not just about life and how to show up for my own party, but also about myself. So 2 days ago was my birthday party, which is why the talk slide, that's not a picture of anything from the party. Unfortunately, my cake looked way better, and I don't wear V-neck shirts. Plus, everybody knows you wear vertical stripes. Horizontal stripes are... Anyway, so I got to practice showing up for my party. And it was difficult at times, especially because I had the wonderful idea to have karaoke. And as I got up to torture myself and everyone else at the party by singing into a microphone, I got to experience what that was like. And I got to practice what it means to be present in that. I definitely wasn't present and wasn't showing up the entire time. It was a struggle, and still is. I know that when I don't show up, my world becomes smaller. I experience less because I'm focused here. I'm focused in on what are people thinking? What are people thinking now as I'm standing up here talking? What are people thinking when I didn't hit that note when I was singing? That note, all of the notes. So it's a practice. I think that the words self-conscious are interesting because if I look at the 2 words, self-conscious, they seem kind of like a positive thing, right? Self-awareness, self-focused, ego-focused. I think over time, self-conscious has taken on a negative connotation because it's not self with an uppercase S, as in true self, as in true nature, as in God nature. It's self with a little s, ego. My outer self, my projection, what I want people to see. And I think I'm not alone in struggling with self-consciousness. So I wanted to share today about a perspective shift that happened for me recently. I went on a couple of trips over the summer, and when I got back from the second one, I was really excited and emailed Nian and was like, Nian, I got to share at the next community share. And she was like, oh God, okay. But I wanted to talk about this perspective shift in the hopes that maybe some things from my story might ring for others here. So I want to talk first about what does it look like when I don't show up? What does that mean when I fail to show up? What does that mean when my world becomes small? Well, some of the obvious ways are acting, pretending to be someone I'm not, maybe changing the things I would say, changing how I would say them, changing my clothes, my hairstyle, maybe laughing at jokes that I otherwise wouldn't, or maybe not laughing at jokes that I otherwise would. Outward ways that I alter myself to fit my surroundings, to fit what I think others want to see. But there are some less obvious ways that I fail to show up as well, like ignoring my values, crossing mine or others' boundaries, maybe pulling in, withdrawing, shyness. I learned here at Unity that shyness is I-ness, and I love that phrase. Shyness is focused here, not on my true nature, but on the ego, the outer self, what I want to project, what I want others to see. Obviously, this causes a lot of harm. I end up being around the wrong people, associating with groups that don't necessarily fit me, not showing up fully, and eventually losing complete sight of who I am. For a long time, the words "be yourself" were completely lost on me. What did that mean? I had no idea what "be yourself" even meant. I had no basis for comparison at all. So I couldn't have done that even if I tried, even if I wanted to, which I did. And at times thought that I was. But I really wasn't. This, of course, caused a lot of pain in my life, pain from disconnection from myself, but also in alienating myself from relationships, from family, from friends. It is the primary cause of the failure of my marriage and other relationships in my life as well. When I failed to show up, when I pretended, when I put on a facade and gave what I thought others wanted to see. So what drove all this for me? Obviously, it's not helpful. It's painful. It's harmful. It's harmful to not just myself, but others around me as well. What's behind it all? For me, that's fear and shame. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of embarrassment, fear of humiliation, fear of failure. I felt some of that before getting up here. Oh my God, what if I don't say everything that I want to say in just the right way that I want to say it? Shame is the message that I am not worthy, less than, bad or defective, not good enough. And if fear is the voice, shame is the script that it reads. I've noticed, though, that shame and pride look an awful lot alike. Both of them put my focus here on my outer self. Both of them close my world down. Both of them cause me to be self-conscious. Shame just has a deflating feeling, while pride has an inflating feeling. But both of them have the same end result: I don't show up. Shame and pride both are all about comparisons. Less than or greater than, compared to who or what? Not enough for who or what? Bad compared to who or what? Without that baseline of comparison, I don't think shame or pride can exist. Because it's all about what's my ranking? What's my judgment of myself? Where do I put myself in the grading scale? Where do I measure? Don Miguel Ruiz, in his book, The Four Agreements, actually talks about this, and talks about the inner judge and the inner critic, and he calls it domestication of humans, and I love that term. It is. It's the domestication of humans. How often does my inner judge and inner critic keep me in check? Or keep me from really showing up and maybe disrupting things a little bit? Giving people what I think they want to see. I think there is a degree, though, of normal conforming, because we do have to conform some in order to show up in the world and associate in a world full of other human beings. But I think it's taken too far when that then encroaches on the very creative differences between us that make us beautiful representations of spirit in this world. Sure, we can't step on other people's toes and violate other human rights. But what about our individual personalities? When those are squashed, I think it's gone too far. Of course, for me, most all of this started in childhood, where my family, like many, thought that it would be best for me to conform to a certain ideology in order for me to be successful and safe. Unfortunately, that measure by which I was compared was perfection. And I obviously could not live up to that in my human ways or in their standard of what perfection was. And so I learned how to people please. I learned how to give what I thought they wanted to see. And in exchange, receive the affirmation and attention and really permission to exist, permission to be that I thought I needed as a kid. In my family, there weren't any other kids. I was the only one. So family gatherings were a little bit painful because I would be lavished on with attention and praise for how great I am. And then all the adults would go back and talk about adult things, and I would go off by myself. I remember for years, all the way up until recently, really, being around other people, whether it be family or friends, and feeling very uncomfortable because I had this mask on. And I just wanted to be alone. I just wanted to go off and be alone because I felt so uncomfortable. And then I would go off and I would be alone and I would feel terribly lonely and wanted to be around people. So I remember this tug-of-war feeling for most of my life. And I didn't realize at the time that it relates entirely to showing up. My journey toward showing up started about 4 years ago when I went into 12-step recovery. And it started there where I learned and got to hear other people showing up and sharing uncomfortable and maybe embarrassing and painful experience. And I started to do the same, and I started to realize, oh my gosh, people talk about this stuff? People show up and say these things to other people? No. But it was in those rooms that I started to realize that it was okay to do that. And I started to realize that honesty was incredibly important, not just with other people, but with myself as well. And I started to learn how to become honest with myself. But it largely stayed in those rooms until I got here. About a year and a half later, I made it into Unite after Unite had been a service for about 6 months or so. And I started experiencing other people showing up. Holy cow, these people struggle with things too. What? No. And I started to realize, wow, I can actually be imperfect around other people. I can actually be imperfect in the world. What? That's crazy. In this community, I also found a primary relationship with my partner, Melanie. And those same principles that I learned in recovery and later in Unite here, in Unity, carry also into a primary relationship where I'm learning how to show up and how to be honest with myself, with her, in a more intimate setting. So I'm realizing through the combination of all of these different avenues that showing up is a complete picture. Showing up means showing up everywhere. Not just in this room, not just in this place, not just with these people, not just with this relationship, but everywhere. And I'm realizing that the world needs that. Over the summer, I took a couple of trips. The first trip that I took was to Texas. I go every year, I go to see my family, I go to see my friends. And this time Melanie came with me. And so she got a chance to meet my family, meet my friends, and kind of see a little bit of where I grew up. And then a week later, I went to New York with her and got to experience the same thing, got to meet her family, got to see where she grew up, got to experience New York. I'd never been there before. And it was there that this perspective shift that I'm sharing with you happened. And it was big because it was a struggle for me being there. While in New York, my inner critic, my judge, whatever you want to call it, grabbed a megaphone and was reminding me how less than I am compared to this big city girl. You know, growing up in simpler Texas, having a more isolated, lonelier life, not experiencing as many things as she has, all these comparisons. And the night before I flew back here to Kansas City, it was a very restless night because I was at all-out absolute war with myself. Very uncomfortable, but very, very good. Because through it, an idea came, and it was an idea so simple that I ignored it at first. And it wasn't until a couple of days later that I realized, oh wow, this is perhaps one of those miracles, one of those simple perspective shifts. And the idea was, what if it doesn't matter? What if none of that matters? What if everything that my inner critic and my judge was saying to me didn't matter at all? What if it's not about me? But it's always been about me. It was a hard thing to wrap my brain around at first, but the more I sat with it, the more I realized, oh my gosh, it really is just a change in perspective. What if instead of focusing on the things that my inner critic says, the things that my ego say, which put my focus here, what if I simply just change what I'm looking at? Change my focus. I'm a motorcycle rider, and Terry, I didn't tell you this, but there's another slide. Very exciting. In motorcycle riding, there is a concept called target fixation. And it's kind of hard to see in the picture, but there's a bullseye on the sign there, and then there's a green arrow pointing around the curve. The idea is this: the bike is going to go where I'm looking. So if I'm riding along and I turn my head, I'm going to start drifting in that direction. The same thing happens with walking. It happens with bicycle riding as well. It's just mostly well known with motorcycle riding because it gets riders in a lot of trouble and has almost gotten me in a lot of trouble on several occasions, such as a corner like that one, where I might be going around to the right and a car is coming around to the left in the other lane, minding its own car business, but I look at it and I start drifting toward it, and then I'm looking at it more because it's getting bigger, and I start drifting toward it, and I'm still drifting toward it. I'm moving toward the danger that I want to avoid. Why? Because I'm looking at the danger. I've almost wrecked a few times because of that. And the thing that saved me was refocusing on the road, turning my attention back toward the road in front of me. And then the bike naturally followed its path. The car went on by, and I went on riding. Shaking from adrenaline, but I went on riding. I think this concept is really neat because it applies in life as well. What I focus on is going to become all I see if I focus on it long enough. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to consume my consciousness. It's going to consume my experience. And so even if I'm looking at these ideas with the heart of fixing them, I got to change this. I got to change all of these things about myself so that I can have self-esteem, so that I can then show up in the world. But the reason this perspective shift was so powerful for me is because it's not in that order. Showing up happens first, and then the rest of it flows. It's almost like I've been trying to strangle water out of a garden hose. I'm trying to crush it out of the garden hose. What would happen instead if I let go and trust that the water flowed? Trust that it would, and see if it did. Just like the motorcycle drifting back onto the right path after looking away from what I thought was danger. I'm finding that simply refocusing on my experience and what is in front of me instead of focusing on fixing ideologies or ideas that might be negative to my experience, I'm finding that those kind of resolve themselves naturally. So my focus has been in the wrong place. So the thing that keeps me focused on those things, of course, is fear. And moving away from and showing up in the world is easier said than done. Very much so, easier said than done. But I think there's a couple of different types of fear. One of the types of fear, which I'll call legitimate fear, is the fear that you feel when running from a bear. There's none back here, is there? Okay, good. There's a clear exit path. That kind of fear says, do this thing and do it now. And then once the situation's over, it dissipates. The other kind of fear, I'll call ego fear, is not like that. Ego fear is vague, swirling, constant. Sometimes all the way up here on the brink of an anxiety attack, and sometimes it's just this low-level sensation down here, but it never seems to really go away. And it never seems to present a clear exit path, and it never seems to present exactly what it wants. It just kind of spins and swirls in there. Ego fear is very difficult to overcome, but I'm finding in my life that every single time that I have been presented with this kind of fear, moving into and through it has been the absolute right answer. Because I'm also finding that along with that sensation of fear is a secret want, a secret desire. I was afraid to come up here on the stage and talk. I'm still nervous. My hands are ice cold and clammy. Ugh. But there was a secret want to do this because I wanted to talk about and share this, that I had learned, that I am learning, that I am very imperfectly practicing with you. There was a want and a desire to bring this to the world. Not that it's anything new. Sometimes I only get things when they're presented in a certain way, like I have to I have to get certain words and then, there it is. I'm also finding that ego fear is a lot like a movie theater screen or a lot like a screen like this. It's huge and bright, fills my entire field of view, fills my entire peripheral vision. It's like sitting on the front row of an IMAX movie. It's loud, I can't take my eyes off of it. The projections are often frightening. Or maybe they're not frightening, maybe they're comforting. Nevertheless, they represent something that is not quite reality. But just like a movie theater screen, just like this one, it's as thin as a sheet of paper. It's just a screen. If I tear that, I'm through it. That's it. It's not moving through a storm that will carry on for years. It's tear through the fear, and there's the other side. There's life that's been waiting for me. There's lessons that have been waiting for me to learn. Right there. Right behind something as thin as a sheet of paper. It's like seeing what I think is a huge monster in the fog, when really it's a mouse with a flashlight behind it. I realize that it's not quite so big. But because it spins and swirls all the time, it takes up my entire field of view. So what does it mean to shift my focus? What am I shifting my focus to? Gratitude. I'm shifting my focus to what's in front of me, but ultimately that means gratitude. What am I grateful for about this experience? What am I grateful for about these people? What am I grateful for about this person? What am I grateful for about my feelings in the situation? Focusing on gratitude, which is one thing that I've really started to try and do since New York. And it really has changed and shifted not just how I show up, but the fact that I can. If I'm focusing on what I'm grateful for what or who is in front of me, or what or who is part of my experience right now, it takes the focus off of my outer self. It takes the focus off of this need to show up in any particular way. And it puts the focus out there. Like releasing that garden hose and letting the water flow naturally as it should. When I can take my focus off of my outer self, my ego, and place my focus on my experience, I relax. And I'm also learning that I relax into the knowing that there's more than just what I'm trying to project. That life is bigger than that, far bigger. My world gets bigger rather than smaller. And I get to experience things that I wouldn't have otherwise seen. The times during my party that I didn't show up, and I was focused on myself at the party, I missed out on a lot. But the times when I could and did show up and put my focus on the party, well, then I was at the party. And I was with all of the people that I love at the party. So I'm finding that letting go of my focus on the things that keep my world small, including my efforts to make my world bigger, enable life to unfold naturally, enable these things to unfold naturally. It's letting go of my effort to control and letting the good of Spirit, of God, of my true divine nature flow out as it should, living from the inside out. Thank you.